Welcome back everyone to another episode of my DIY Plywood Aquarium build. If you've been following this project from the previous episodes, you know that this aquarium has turned into a pretty big project. We've already done a lot of work rebuilding and reinforcing the main aquarium, but now we're moving on to another major part of the system. In this episode, I'm going to start constructing the massive overhead sump filter that will eventually sit above the aquarium. Instead of buying a conventional aquarium sump, I'm building this entire filter myself out of plywood, just like the aquarium. The advantage of building something like this yourself is that you can make it exactly the size and shape you need. I'm not limited to whatever size sump happens to be available at a store. I can determine how much filtration space I want, where the different chambers are going to be located, and how the water is going to travel through the system. And because this is going to be an overhead sump filter, the basic idea is pretty simple. Water from the aquarium will be pumped upward into this filter. It will then travel through the different filtration sections before gravity carries the filtered water back down into the aquarium. So once the system is operating, I'm basically going to have this large filtration system constantly processing the aquarium water from above. You can see just how large this thing is once the main plywood box starts coming together. I intentionally wanted a large sump because this is a very large aquarium, and I would rather have more filtration capacity than not enough. A larger sump also gives me much more freedom with the internal layout. At this stage, I'm cutting the plywood and getting the basic structure assembled. With something this large, getting everything straight and square is important. A small error on one piece can turn into a much larger alignment problem by the time you get to the opposite end of the box. So I'm taking my time measuring everything, making the cuts, checking the fit, and then assembling the pieces. This is also one of those projects where you can have a design in your head, but once you actually start putting the pieces together, you sometimes realize that something needs to change. That's just part of building something from scratch. I don't expect every idea to work perfectly the first time. I'd rather change something now while I'm still constructing it than discover a problem later when the entire system is full of water. Once the main structure is together, I can start working on the internal sections of the sump. This is where the filter starts becoming more than just a big plywood box.
Bang the pan, I got 2 clean shoes and a pocket full of plan. Bus wheel turn, dust on the lane. You call my name, I smile in the rain. Step by step, we don't rush that. Heartbeat glad and the whole street clap. Feel it roll, there on pocket. Feel it roll, we can't stop it. One low, one step. Oh, black got it. Feel it roll, beer on pocket. Ice in the cup, fruit on the plate. Old porch radio spinning first rate. Sharp dress crew, ready for the dance. Sweet hand clap and a brand new chance. Step by step, we don't rush that. Heartbeat glad and the whole street clap. Feel it roll, beer on pocket. Feel it roll, we can't stop it. One love, one step. Oh, black got it. Feel it roll, beer on pocket.
Once the internal structure is finished and the divider sections are secured, I'm preparing the inside of the sump for epoxy. I'm using marine-grade epoxy resin because I want the plywood completely isolated from the water. When properly applied and cured, the epoxy forms a hard protective barrier over the wood. It also does something else that's very useful for a project like this. The epoxy doesn't only waterproof the surface, it also helps reinforce the construction by soaking into the surface of the plywood and bonding the different areas together. When you combine the plywood structure, bonded joints, fiberglass reinforcement where needed, and multiple layers of epoxy protection, the finished assembly becomes much more rigid and durable than the unfinished plywood box you saw at the beginning. Now I'm mixing the epoxy resin. Whenever you're working with a two-part epoxy system, the mixing ratio is extremely important. You have the resin and the hardener, and those components need to be measured according to the manufacturer's specified ratio. Adding extra hardener doesn't make epoxy cure better or faster. The chemistry is designed around the correct proportion, so I always try to measure the mixture carefully. I also don't want to mix a giant batch at one time. Once the resin and hardener are combined, the curing reaction begins. That means I have a limited working time to actually get the epoxy onto the plywood. Mixing smaller batches gives me more control and prevents me from having a large amount of epoxy begin curing in the container before I can use it. After mixing everything thoroughly, I can start applying it to the inside of the sump. And this is where you can immediately see the plywood change appearance.
Bare feet in the sand, soft on your skin. Moon on the water and your eyes pull me in. Let the palms sway, slow breeze, sweet and low. You say my name soft and I already know. Hold me close now, let the night fall slow. Every wave says, baby, don't let go. I've been chasing peace from coast to coast. Now your heart feels like the place I know. Stay with me tonight. Stay with me tonight. Pull me to the tide. Pull me to the tide. Coral after glow. Coral after glow. We disappear slow. We disappear slow. Lanterns on the porch, fruit in the bowl. You laugh like the rain on a thirsty soul. I brought my scars here, you brought your light. Now the whole damn sky feels warm tonight. Hold me close now, let the night fall slow. Every wave says, baby, don't let go. I've been chasing peace from coast to coast. Now your heart feels like the place I know. Stay with me tonight. Stay with me tonight. Pull me to the tide. Pull me to the tide. Coral after glow. Coral after glow. We disappear slow. We disappear slow. If the world gets loud, we can drift away past the reef and moon where the blue stars stay. Put your hand in mine, let the whole world fade. We were born for this, salt, fire, and shade. Stay with me tonight. Stay with me tonight. Pull me to the tide. Pull me to the tide. Coral after glow. Coral after glow. We disappear slow. We disappear slow.
Now you can see the finished result for this stage of the build. The internal wooden sections are permanently installed. The biomedia area has been separated from the much larger planted filtration area. The joints have been bonded and reinforced, and the interior plywood has received its marine epoxy treatment. Compared with the empty plywood box at the beginning of the episode, we're getting much closer to having an actual functional overhead sump filter. there's still quite a bit left to do. In the next episode, I'll be designing and building lids for this massive overhead sump filter and continuing to move closer to the point where we can finally install the entire system on top of the aquarium. There's still a lot of work ahead before the fish can go back into the main tank, but we're getting there one piece at a time. If you're new to the channel and you haven't seen the earlier parts of this build, go back and check out the previous episodes. You can see how this plywood aquarium started, the repairs and reinforcement work I've done, the fiberglass and waterproofing process, and how we eventually arrived at building this overhead sump filtration system. And if you've been following the project from the beginning, thank you for continuing to follow along. I really appreciate everyone who's been watching this build and seeing this aquarium slowly come back together. In the next episode, we'll continue right where we're leaving off here and start working on those sump filter lids, so stay tuned.